Chapter 1. The greatest lie we tell about success. The theater falls silent. Bright lights flood the stage as a man walks toward the microphone. The audience rises to its feet, applauding a life that has become the symbol of success. Cameras flash from every direction. Journalists fight for the perfect photograph. Tomorrow, newspapers around the world will carry a familiar headline, *, the self-made billionaire. It is a phrase we have heard countless times. Self-made entrepreneur, self-made millionaire, self-made champion, self-made genius. We admire these stories because they give us hope. They suggest that no matter where we begin, determination alone can carry us to extraordinary heights. It is one of the most inspiring ideas ever created. It is also one of the most misunderstood, because hidden inside the phrase self-made is a quiet assumption that a single individual, through nothing more than intelligence and hard work, built everything alone. But let us pause for a moment. As the audience applauds this successful man, look beyond the stage, look into the shadows. Somewhere in that darkness sits a teacher who stayed behind after class because they saw potential in a restless student. Somewhere else is a mother who sacrificed her own dreams so her child could chase theirs. A father who worked overtime to pay school fees. An engineer who designed the computer that child would later use. A scientist whose discoveries made modern technology possible. Construction workers who built the roads leading to the company's headquarters. Farmers who produced the food that sustained every employee. Programmers who wrote software that no customer will ever know exists. Thousands of invisible people stand behind the one person receiving the applause. Yet history has a habit of doing something strange. It remembers the face. It forgets the foundation. This is not only true in business, it is true in every corner of human achievement. When we admire a magnificent cathedral, we remember the architect. We rarely remember the stonemasons who spent decades cutting rock with bleeding hands. When we stand before a great monument, we admire the ruler who commissioned it. We seldom ask about the thousands of workers whose names disappeared into history. When we celebrate a championship team, we remember the captain lifting the trophy. We almost never remember the physiotherapists, nutritionists, assistant coaches, groundskeepers, analysts, and countless others who made that victory possible. Human beings are naturally drawn to heroes. Our minds love simple stories. One hero, one genius, one inventor, one leader, one winner. Reality is almost never that simple. Civilization itself is built upon invisible cooperation. The clothes you wear were stitched by people you have never met. The electricity lighting your home depends on engineers, technicians, power plant operators, and maintenance workers whose names you will never know. The phone in your pocket contains discoveries made by physicists, chemists, mathematicians, software developers, miners, factory workers, designers, and shipping crews spread across continents. Every ordinary day of your life depends on extraordinary cooperation, yet we rarely notice it because it has become normal. The invisible is easy to ignore until it disappears. Think about electricity. Most people never appreciate it until the lights go out. Think about clean water. Most people never think about it until it stops flowing. Think about peace. Entire generations forget its value until conflict arrives. The greatest foundations of life are often the ones we notice the least. Success works the same way. The strongest foundations are usually invisible. Decades after observing societies around the world, the Scottish philosopher Adam Smith wrote about the extraordinary power created when countless individuals, each performing different tasks, unknowingly contribute to something much larger than themselves. Modern economies are not built by isolated brilliance. They are built through cooperation on a scale so vast that no single mind can fully comprehend it. Centuries later, sociologists, economists, psychologists, and historians would arrive at a similar conclusion. Human achievement is never purely individual. It is cumulative. Each generation inherits knowledge from the one before it. Each child inherits language they never invented. Each scientist inherits discoveries they never made. Each entrepreneur inherits institutions they never built. Each nation inherits history it never chose. The truth is both humbling and liberating. You are not standing where you are because you built the entire staircase. You are standing there because countless hands placed one stone upon another long before you were born. Does that mean effort does not matter? Not at all. If anything, it makes effort even more meaningful. Because opportunities are like seeds. Receiving a seed is not the same as growing a forest. The seed may be given. The work of cultivation still belongs to you. The rain may fall. The soil may be fertile. Others may teach you how to plant. But nobody can force the tree to grow in your place. This is where the greatest misunderstanding begins. Some people hear discussions about privilege and conclude that success is only luck. Others hear discussions about hard work and conclude that everyone begins from the same place. Both views miss the deeper truth. Life is neither completely fair nor completely predetermined. Human success is created where opportunity and responsibility meet. One without the other is incomplete. Throughout this documentary, we are going to examine the invisible forces that shape every human life. The family you never chose, the country you happened to be born in, the century you entered, the teachers who influenced you, the strangers who opened doors you never expected, the failures that redirected your path, the moments of luck that changed everything, and the responsibility that comes with every opportunity life places in your hands. By the end of this journey, you may never use the phrase *self-made in quite the same way again. Because the deeper you look into any great success story, the more invisible people you begin to see. And perhaps the greatest measure of a successful life is not whether you reach the top alone. It is whether, after reaching the top, you became part of someone else's foundation. Chapter 2: The First Lottery. On the morning of February 12, 1809, two boys entered the world. The first was born inside a small one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. There were no luxurious rooms, no servants, no family fortune waiting to be inherited. The cabin stood on rough land surrounded by uncertainty. The family owned very little. Books were scarce. Life was difficult. The second boy was born thousands of miles away inside a palace. Silk covered the walls. Servants waited outside the doors. The child would never wonder where the next meal would come from. Before he learned to walk, he already possessed wealth greater than the first boy's family would earn in generations. Neither child had done anything. Neither had worked. Neither had failed. Neither had succeeded. Yet before either of them opened their eyes, life had already made thousands of decisions on their behalf. One inherited privilege, the other inherited struggle. This is the first truth about human success. Long before effort begins, life has already dealt everyone a different hand. The boy born in the cabin would eventually become Abraham Lincoln. History would remember him as one of America's greatest presidents. The child born into the palace would inherit comforts that millions of people could never imagine. Yet history reminds us of something remarkable. Privilege can be wasted. Hardship can be overcome. Neither guarantees the future, but both influence it. Human beings love stories about determination. We admire the person who rises from nothing. We celebrate the entrepreneur who builds an empire, the athlete who escapes poverty, the scientist who changes history. What we rarely discuss is something much quieter, their starting point. Imagine two runners preparing for the same race. One begins on smooth pavement. The other begins knee-deep in mud. Both hear the same starting gun. Both run with everything they have. Hours later, people compare the finishing times. Very few ask where each runner started. Life often works exactly like that. When we compare people, we usually compare outcomes, rarely beginnings. This simple mistake shapes the way societies judge success. It is why some people believe the wealthy must be smarter. It is why others believe the poor simply did not work hard enough. Reality is more complicated. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu spent much of his career studying why opportunity seems to repeat itself across generations. He noticed that families pass down much more than money. They pass down habits, language, convictions, expectations, knowledge about how the world works. He called these invisible advantages *cultural capital. Think about a child growing up in a home where books fill every shelf. Dinner conversations explore history, science, politics, and ideas. Parents know how universities work. They understand professional careers. Failure becomes a lesson rather than a permanent label. Now imagine another child. The parents work every available hour simply to survive. Books are a luxury. Conversations revolve around paying rent, finding work, and making tomorrow possible. Education matters deeply, but survival matters first. Neither child chose their family. Neither chose the conversations they overheard. Neither chose the examples they watched every day. Yet those invisible experiences begin shaping the adults they will eventually become. Long before a child chooses a career, they are learning what success looks like. Long before they write their first examination, they are learning whether mistakes are something to fear or something to learn from. Long before they earn their first salary, they are absorbing beliefs about money, ambition, discipline, and possibility. Children are always watching, even when adults believe they are not teaching. Parents teach through example long before they teach through words. A child who grows up watching promises being kept often learns responsibility without anyone defining the word. A child who grows up watching kindness begins treating kindness as normal. A child who grows up surrounded by constant conflict may unconsciously expect conflict everywhere they go. The first classroom most human beings ever enter is not a school, it is a home. Some homes teach confidence, others teach caution, some teach curiosity, others teach fear, some teach resilience, others unknowingly teach helplessness. This is why the earliest years of life leave such deep fingerprints on adulthood. They become the lens through which we first understand the world. Yet history refuses to let this become an excuse, because while families shape us, they do not imprison us. Lincoln would educate himself by borrowing books whenever he could find them. Many nights he studied by firelight because candles were expensive and opportunities were few. His childhood limited him. It did not define him. That distinction matters. Circumstances influence. They do not completely determine. This balance is one of the greatest truths about human life. If we ignore circumstances, we become arrogant. If we ignore personal responsibility, we become helpless. Wisdom requires holding both ideas together. You inherit a beginning. You do not inherit your ending. Every successful person carries two stories, the story of what they received and the story of what they chose to do with it. One without the other can never explain a human life. As you listen to this documentary, I invite you to ask yourself a question. Not whether your beginning was fair. Few beginnings are. Instead, ask something more powerful. What invisible gifts did my family give me that I have never noticed? Perhaps it was discipline. Perhaps faith. Perhaps resilience. Perhaps love. Perhaps the determination that comes only from overcoming hardship. Whatever the answer, someone was building part of your future long before you understood what the future was. And that invisible investment may be the first foundation upon which every success in your life now stands. Chapter 3: The Map You Never Chose. On the morning of January 9, 2007, a child was born in Silicon Valley, California. At almost the exact same moment, another child was born in a small rural village thousands of kilometers away. Neither child understood what had just happened. Neither knew their own name. Neither had spoken a single word. Neither had shown intelligence, determination, or talent. Yet the world had already given them two completely different futures to navigate. One would grow up surrounded by some of the world's most innovative companies. The names of companies like Apple, Google, Intel, and countless technology startups would become part of everyday conversation. Engineers, entrepreneurs, investors, and programmers filled the surrounding communities. Libraries were stocked with books. Schools had internet access. Universities stood only a short journey away. The language of innovation surrounded the child long before they understood its meaning. The second child entered a very different world. The nearest hospital might be hours away. Electricity could disappear without warning. Internet access was limited or expensive. Schools struggled with shortages of teachers and learning materials. Parents worked tirelessly, not to build companies, but simply to provide tomorrow's meal. Neither child deserved their circumstances. Neither earned them. Yet before either child had taken their first step, life had already placed them on different roads. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths about human existence. The place where you are born may become one of the greatest influences on the life you eventually build, not because geography determines destiny, but because geography determines possibility. For centuries, people believed success belonged almost entirely to individuals. If someone became wealthy, they must have been more capable. If someone remained poor, they must have failed to work hard enough. It is a comforting explanation. It is also incomplete. The economist Branko Milanovic has argued that one of the strongest predictors of a person's economic opportunities is something they never chose, the country into which they were born. Think about that for a moment. Before ambition, before education, before discipline, before dreams, a passport already begins shaping opportunity. It influences the quality of schools, the availability of healthcare, the strength of legal institutions, the size of the economy, the safety of investments, the freedom to start businesses, the stability required for long-term planning. We often celebrate successful individuals while forgetting the invisible systems that made their success possible. Imagine opening a business. Customers arrive because roads connect cities. Suppliers deliver goods because transport networks exist. Money moves because banks function. Contracts matter because courts enforce them. Electricity powers machines. Communication networks connect buyers and sellers. The entrepreneur deserves credit, but the entrepreneur is never working alone. Behind every successful business stands an entire civilization. The economists Darren Acemoglu and James A. Robinson explored this idea in their study of why some nations prosper while others struggle. Their conclusion was both simple and profound. Nations flourish when institutions encourage people to create, invest, innovate, and trust that their work will be protected. Strong institutions do not guarantee success, but they dramatically increase the number of people capable of achieving it. Weak institutions do the opposite. They force talented people to spend enormous energy overcoming problems that should never exist. History provides remarkable examples. After the Korean War, South Korea was one of the poorest countries on Earth. Entire cities had been destroyed. Families were separated. The future appeared uncertain. Yet over the following decades, the country invested heavily in education. It expanded manufacturing. It strengthened institutions. It embraced technology. The result was not one successful company. It was an entire generation of opportunity. Companies like Samsung Electronics did not appear by accident. They grew within an environment that increasingly rewarded engineering, research, discipline, and innovation. History reminds us that countries, like people, can change direction. The same lesson applies across Africa. Too often, conversations about Africa begin and end with blame. Some blame colonialism for every modern challenge. Others blame contemporary leadership alone. Reality is more demanding than either explanation. History matters. Colonial borders, unequal development, and extractive economic systems left lasting effects across many nations. But history is not destiny. Every generation inherits a past. Every generation also decides what to build next. The future is never created by history alone. It is created by people responding to history. There is another invisible advantage that few people notice. Time. Not the time on a clock, the time in history. Imagine being born 500 years ago. There are no antibiotics, no electricity, no computers, no airplanes, no satellites, no internet. Many opportunities that feel ordinary today simply do not exist. Now imagine being born during the rise of artificial intelligence. Entire industries are changing. Jobs are being redefined. New businesses are appearing almost every month. A person who understands these changes early may build opportunities that previous generations could never have imagined. The opportunity is historical. Whether someone uses it is personal. This is why Malcolm Gladwell argued that extraordinary success often appears when exceptional preparation meets exceptional timing. Talent alone is not enough. Timing alone is not enough. Preparation allows people to recognize opportunities while others walk straight past them. History quietly opens doors. Prepared minds notice them. There is a temptation after hearing all this to become discouraged, to think that if birthplace matters, then effort must matter less. History rejects that conclusion. Some of the greatest builders in history began in places where success seemed unlikely. They studied when books were scarce. They built businesses where capital was limited. They educated themselves when schools were inadequate. Their beginnings made the journey harder. They did not make the journey impossible. This is the balance we must never lose. Circumstances influence us. They do not completely define us. Your country shapes your opportunities. It does not decide your character. Your history shapes your starting point. It does not write your final chapter. Perhaps the better question is not, why wasn't I born somewhere else? Perhaps the better question is, what can I build where I am? Because every nation admired today was once built by ordinary people who refused to believe that their circumstances were permanent. And every better future begins the same way, with someone deciding that the world they inherited will not be the world they leave behind.
Chapter 4: The Stranger Wu Change History.
In the autumn of 1968, a shy 12-year-old boy walked into a classroom in Brooklyn, New York. He was quiet. He doubted himself. He had no idea that history would one day know his name. To the world, he was just another child. To one teacher, he was something else, potential. The teacher challenged him to speak, to read, to think more deeply, to believe that his voice mattered. Years later, that boy would become one of the most influential public speakers in the United States. The teacher never became famous. The student did. History remembers the student. Life remembers the teacher. That is one of the quiet tragedies of civilization. The people who change history are not always the people whose names appear in history books. Some of them never become famous. Some never become wealthy. Some never receive awards. Yet without them, the people we celebrate might never have existed. Human history is full of invisible architects. We usually imagine success as a lonely climb, one determined person fighting against impossible odds. The image is inspiring. It is also incomplete, because every successful life contains people who quietly redirected its course. Sometimes they were parents. Sometimes they were friends. Sometimes they were complete strangers. A recommendation, a conversation, an introduction, a second chance. A single decision from another person can redirect an entire lifetime. Think about how many moments in your own life happened because someone opened a door. Perhaps someone recommended you for your first job. Perhaps a teacher encouraged you when you were about to give up. Perhaps a friend introduced you to someone who changed your career. Perhaps someone lent you a book that completely transformed the way you think. Most turning points in life do not announce themselves. While they are happening, they often feel ordinary. Only years later do we realize that everything changed because of a single moment. This is why relationships are one of the greatest forms of wealth a human being can possess. Money can disappear. Knowledge can become outdated. Technology can change. But a meaningful relationship can alter the direction of a life forever. The American political scientist Robert Putnam spent decades studying what he called social capital. Unlike financial capital, social capital is built through trust, through cooperation, through relationships. Communities rich in trust tend to create more opportunities. People share ideas, businesses form, knowledge spreads. Young people find mentors. Innovation becomes easier because people are willing to work together. When trust disappears, opportunity begins disappearing with it. This is true for societies. It is equally true for individuals. Imagine two graduates leaving university with identical qualifications. One knows no one. The other has mentors who introduce them to employers. The difference is not intelligence, it is connection. Connection is often invisible until you need it. One of the clearest examples of this is found in the life of Warren Buffett. People often describe Buffett as one of the greatest investors who ever lived. That description is accurate, but there is another part of the story that receives far less attention. As a young man, Buffett became deeply influenced by Benjamin Graham. Graham was not simply a professor. He became a mentor. He taught Buffett how to think, not what to think, how to think. That distinction changed everything. Years later, Buffett would often acknowledge the enormous influence Graham had on his life. One teacher, one student, one relationship. A ripple that would eventually influence global finance. The same pattern appears throughout history. Steve Jobs is often remembered as a visionary, and he was. But Apple was never built by one person. Alongside Jobs stood Steve Wozniak, whose engineering brilliance transformed bold ideas into working machines. Around them stood thousands of designers, engineers, manufacturers, programmers, managers, employees, suppliers, customers. Remove enough of those people, and one of the world's most valuable companies might never have existed. The myth of the lone genius is comforting. Reality is more extraordinary. Human beings achieve greatness together. Even science itself advances this way. When Isaac Newton wrote, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants," he was not being polite. He was describing how knowledge actually works. Every scientist inherits discoveries from previous generations. Every engineer builds upon earlier engineering. Every doctor studies medicine developed by thousands of researchers before them. Civilization is not a collection of isolated achievements. It is a conversation that has lasted thousands of years. Each generation adds another chapter, then hands the book to the next. This should change how we think about success. Instead of asking, who deserves the credit? Perhaps we should ask, how many people made this possible? The answer is almost always impossible to calculate. Behind every successful person are hundreds of invisible contributors. The teacher who stayed after school, the parent who believed, the friend who encouraged, the colleague who shared an opportunity, the stranger who took a chance, the worker who built the infrastructure, the scientist whose discovery became everyday technology. Most of these people will never know the full impact of what they contributed. That is one of the beautiful things about human life. You do not always get to see the harvest from the seeds you plant. A teacher may never witness the student becoming a great leader. A parent may never fully understand the influence they had on their child's character. A mentor may never realize that one conversation changed someone's destiny forever, yet the influence remains long after the moment has passed. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. You will never know how many lives your actions quietly touch. A kind word, an introduction, an opportunity, a lesson, a second chance. These small moments rarely appear important when they happen, but history is often changed by moments that seemed ordinary at the time. Perhaps, somewhere in your own future, there is a person whose life will be different because of a decision you have not yet made. And perhaps someone else's future is waiting for you to become the stranger who changes their history. Chapter 5: The Moment History Knocks. On the morning of January 24, 1984, a young man wearing a bow tie walked onto a stage in California. In front of him sat journalists, engineers, investors, and curious spectators. Beside him rested a small beige computer. By today's standards, it looked almost primitive. But when the machine began to speak, the room erupted. People were witnessing more than the launch of a new product. They were witnessing the beginning of a new era. The man on stage was Steve Jobs. History would remember him as a visionary, and in many ways he was. But there is a deeper question hiding beneath that famous moment. What if Steve Jobs had been born in 1884 instead of 1955? Would he still have built Apple? Would he still have changed the world through personal computers? Probably not. Not because he lacked intelligence, not because he lacked imagination, but because the world itself was different. The microprocessor had not yet been invented. The internet did not exist. Personal computers belonged to science fiction. His mind may have been the same. His century was not. This is one of the most overlooked truths about success. Great people do not exist outside history. They exist inside it. Every generation receives opportunities that no previous generation possessed. The Industrial Revolution created opportunities for engineers. The Age of Exploration created opportunities for navigators. The rise of electricity created opportunities for inventors. The internet created opportunities for software entrepreneurs. Artificial intelligence is now creating opportunities that would have sounded impossible only a decade ago. History constantly changes the rules of the game. Those who recognize the change early often become the people history remembers. The rest wonder how the world moved so quickly without them. This does not mean success is an accident. Far from it. Opportunity alone has never been enough. Imagine giving the world's finest violin to someone who has never learned to play. The instrument has enormous potential. The opportunity exists. But without preparation, nothing extraordinary happens. Now imagine placing that same violin into the hands of a master musician. The opportunity becomes music. History works in much the same way. Opportunity is the instrument. Preparation is the skill. Together they create greatness. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca expressed this idea in a sentence that has survived for nearly 2,000 years. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. People often misunderstand luck. They imagine it as something magical, something completely random, something that arrives without reason. Real life is usually more complicated. Luck often appears to favor those who have spent years preparing for moments that last only minutes. A scientist spends 20 years studying a disease. One experiment succeeds. The world calls it a breakthrough. Few people notice the 2 decades that came before it. A writer spends 10 years filling notebooks with ideas. One book becomes an international success. People call it an overnight achievement. It rarely is. An entrepreneur struggles through failed businesses, rejected proposals, and financial uncertainty. Eventually, one company succeeds. The headlines celebrate the victory. Almost nobody reports the years of invisible preparation. To the outside world, success often appears sudden. To the person living through it, success usually arrives very slowly. This was one of the central observations made by Malcolm Gladwell. When studying extraordinary achievers, Gladwell noticed that remarkable success rarely comes from one factor alone. It emerges where several forces meet: ability, practice, opportunity, timing, culture, history. Take away one of those pieces and the story often changes. This does not diminish human achievement. It reveals how extraordinary achievement actually works. Consider another example. Bill Gates possessed unusual intelligence and remarkable discipline. As a teenager, he spent countless hours learning computer programming. That dedication mattered enormously. But another fact mattered too. He happened to grow up during the birth of the personal computing revolution. Very few schools at that time had access to computers. His did. That opportunity did not guarantee success. It simply gave preparation somewhere to grow. Without his work, the opportunity would have meant very little. Without the opportunity, his work might have remained unseen. Success emerged because both existed together. History quietly presents moments like these to every generation. The tragedy is that most people only recognize them after they have passed. When the internet first appeared, many dismissed it as a curiosity. When smartphones arrived, some believed they were unnecessary. When artificial intelligence began transforming industries, many assumed it was another passing trend. Every great transformation initially looks uncertain. That is why preparation matters so much. Prepared people recognize patterns before they become obvious. They see possibilities while others still see confusion. There is another lesson hidden inside timing. Not everyone receives the opportunity they deserve. History is filled with brilliant people whose ideas arrived too early, inventors whose discoveries were ignored, artists whose work was appreciated only after their deaths, scientists who spent entire lifetimes proving ideas that later generations accepted as obvious. Recognition and value are not always born at the same moment. Sometimes history needs time to catch up. This realization should make us more humble when we succeed. It should also make us more compassionate toward those whose talents remain unnoticed. The absence of recognition is not always the absence of ability. Sometimes the world simply has not caught up yet. Perhaps the greatest responsibility we have is to remain ready, to keep learning, to keep improving, to keep observing, because history has a habit of knocking quietly. It rarely announces that today is the day your life will change. It often arrives disguised as an ordinary conversation, an unexpected opportunity, a difficult challenge, a problem that everyone else ignores. Most people walk past these moments without noticing them. The prepared mind does not. When opportunity finally appears, preparation transforms possibility into reality. And that is why the people we call lucky are so often the people who spent years getting ready for a moment they could never predict. History opens the door. Preparation gives you the courage to walk through it. The future belongs not only to those who dream about tomorrow, it belongs to those who prepare for it before everyone else realizes it has arrived. Chapter 6: The Price That Opportunity Cannot Pay. In the summer of 1998, the training ground was almost empty. Most of the players had already gone home. The day's practice had ended hours earlier. The stadium lights were beginning to fade. One young footballer remained. He gathered the balls scattered across the field. He placed one just outside the penalty area. He took a shot, then another, and another, hundreds of times. Nobody was applauding. There were no cameras, no reporters, no trophies waiting at the end of the session. Only repetition. The young player was Cristiano Ronaldo. Years later, millions would admire his goals. Children would wear his jersey. Commentators would call him one of the greatest footballers in history. What the world celebrated on match day had been built during evenings like this. Alone, invisible, ordinary. This is the part of success that almost nobody wants to watch. The world loves highlights. Life is built in the hours nobody records. We admire championships. We rarely admire Tuesday mornings. We celebrate graduation ceremonies. We forget the thousands of hours spent reading, failing, revising, and beginning again. We admire successful businesses. We overlook the years when customers never came. Opportunity can open a door. It cannot force anyone to walk through it. This is where personal responsibility enters the story. Throughout this documentary, we have seen that family matters, country matters, teachers matter, history matters, timing matters. All of these shape the possibilities available to us. But possibilities are not achievements. A library does not educate someone who never opens a book. A gym does not strengthen someone who never trains. A university cannot graduate a student who refuses to study. Opportunity is an invitation. Achievement is a response. Imagine giving two people identical pieces of fertile land. The first studies agriculture, learns from experienced farmers, plants carefully, protects the soil, returns every season to improve. The second delays, neglects the land, assumes fertile soil is enough. Years later, one farm feeds an entire community, the other produces almost nothing. The difference was never the land, it was the stewardship. Human potential works the same way. Life gives us different resources. What we build with those resources becomes our responsibility. This is one reason the psychologist Angela Duckworth became interested in a question that had puzzled researchers for decades. Why do some people continue moving toward difficult goals while others stop? After years of research, she described a quality she called grit, not brilliance, not natural talent, not extraordinary luck. The combination of passion and perseverance sustained over many years. History quietly supports her conclusion. The greatest cathedrals were not built in a weekend. The greatest books were not written in a month. The greatest discoveries were not made after a few comfortable afternoons. Extraordinary achievements almost always demand extraordinary consistency. This is where modern culture sometimes misleads us. We live in an age of instant visibility. A musician uploads one song and becomes famous. An entrepreneur launches a product that suddenly goes viral. A video receives millions of views overnight. From the outside, everything appears immediate. But visible success often hides invisible preparation. The audience sees the performance. It does not see the decades of practice. The customer sees the finished product. They do not see the years of failed prototypes. The world sees confidence. It rarely sees the self-doubt that came before it. Mastery has always been built in private, long before it is recognized in public. The philosopher Aristotle understood this more than 2,000 years ago. He observed that excellence is not a single act. It is a habit, something repeated until it becomes part of a person's character. This changes the way we should think about success. Success is not simply something you achieve. It is something you repeatedly practice. Every decision shapes the next. Every habit strengthens another. Every small improvement quietly compounds over time. Most people underestimate the power of compounding because they expect dramatic change. Life rarely changes dramatically in one day. It changes almost invisibly over thousands of ordinary days. One page becomes a book. One workout becomes strength. One lesson becomes expertise. One conversation becomes wisdom. One decision becomes character. This is why discipline often feels unrewarding in the beginning. Its rewards are delayed. The cost is immediate. Comfort asks us to rest today. Discipline asks us to prepare for tomorrow. Comfort offers pleasure. Discipline offers possibility. Every meaningful achievement requires choosing between the two again and again. That choice is rarely glamorous. No audience applauds the student who studies while friends are celebrating. No headlines appear when an entrepreneur quietly improves a product after another disappointing month. No medals are awarded for refusing to give up on an ordinary Wednesday. And yet, history is built on ordinary Wednesdays. There is another price that opportunity demands: the willingness to fail. Every person we admire has failed more often than most people realize. Businesses collapsed, experiments failed, books were rejected, campaigns were lost, ideas were mocked, dreams appeared impossible. Failure is not the opposite of success. More often, it is part of the road leading toward it. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl reminded us that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we retain the freedom to choose our response. That freedom becomes most important after disappointment. Failure asks a question: will this experience become your excuse or your education? That answer shapes lives. By now, a pattern should be emerging. Family creates the beginning. Society creates opportunities. History opens doors. Teachers provide direction. Relationships create possibilities. Timing creates moments. But none of these can replace one final decision. The decision to act. Every generation inherits something. Some inherit wealth. Some inherit hardship. Some inherit peace. Some inherit conflict. Every generation also leaves something behind. The question is never only what life gave you. The deeper question is what you chose to do with it. Because in the end, opportunity is a gift, discipline is a choice, and it is that choice, repeated over years that nobody notices, that quietly transforms ordinary people into extraordinary ones. Chapter 7: When Success Becomes the Enemy. On the morning of June 24, 1812, more than 600,000 soldiers crossed the Niemen River into Russia. It was the largest military force Europe had ever seen. The man leading it had defeated kingdom after kingdom. He had reshaped the political map of Europe. His armies seemed unstoppable. Kings feared him, generals studied him, entire nations believed his victories were inevitable. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Only a few years earlier, he had been celebrated as one of history's greatest military minds. Now he believed he could do what no European ruler had successfully accomplished for centuries: conquer Russia. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. City after city fell. The French army continued moving east. Then something unexpected happened. The Russian army refused to fight the decisive battle Napoleon wanted. Instead, they retreated. As they retreated, they burned crops, they destroyed villages, they emptied towns. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, he had captured a city that could no longer feed his army. Winter arrived. Food disappeared. Horses died. Disease spread. The army that had marched into Russia with more than 600,000 soldiers returned with only a fraction of that number. The greatest military campaign of Napoleon's life became the beginning of his downfall. Historians still debate the many reasons for his defeat, but one lesson appears again and again. Success had convinced him that previous victories guaranteed future victories. He believed the rules that had brought him success would continue working forever. History had other plans. This pattern appears far beyond battlefields. It appears in business, politics, sport, science, even in our personal lives. The greatest danger is often not failure. It is the confidence that follows repeated success. Failure forces people to ask questions. Success tempts them to stop asking. Failure makes people humble. Success whispers that humility is no longer necessary. Failure encourages learning. Success creates the illusion that there is nothing left to learn. That illusion has destroyed empires. It has destroyed companies. It has destroyed careers. And sometimes, it destroys ordinary people who simply begin believing they have become untouchable. The strategist Robert Greene has written extensively about this danger. Across history, he observed a recurring pattern. Power changes perception. The longer people remain successful, the easier it becomes to confuse confidence with certainty. At first, confidence is earned. It comes from experience, from discipline, from solving difficult problems. But over time, confidence can quietly transform into something much more dangerous: overconfidence. The difference between the two is subtle. Confidence says, I have learned a great deal. Overconfidence says, there is nothing left for me to learn. One sentence opens the mind, the other closes it. History rarely punishes confidence. It almost always punishes arrogance. Think about companies that once dominated the world. Many believed no competitor could challenge them. Their products were everywhere. Their profits seemed endless. Their leaders became symbols of success. Then technology changed. Customer behavior changed. The market changed. Some adapted. Others insisted the old way would always work. Many of those giants disappeared, not because they suddenly became unintelligent, because yesterday's success became tomorrow's blind spot. Success had stopped them from seeing change. The same danger exists in every profession. A doctor who stops studying because they believe they already know enough. An engineer who refuses to learn new technology. A business owner who ignores changing customers. A leader who no longer listens to honest advice. Decline rarely begins with weakness. It often begins with certainty. One of the greatest strengths a person can develop is the ability to remain teachable, no matter how much they know. The investor Warren Buffett has spent decades reading for hours every day. Despite becoming one of the world's most successful investors, he never behaved as though learning had ended. That habit reveals an important truth. The people who remain successful the longest usually continue behaving like students. They ask questions. They seek different opinions. They invite criticism. They understand that reality is more important than protecting the ego. There is another form of blindness that success creates. It is much quieter. It is the inability to remember the foundations beneath your feet. The successful entrepreneur begins believing the company exists because of their vision alone. They forget the employees who solved impossible problems, the suppliers who stayed loyal during difficult years, the customers who trusted an unknown business, the family members who accepted sacrifice long before success arrived. The athlete begins believing every victory belongs entirely to them. They forget the coach who corrected thousands of mistakes, the physiotherapist who kept injuries from ending a career, the teammates who created opportunities no statistic can measure. The politician begins believing they alone transformed a nation. They forget the civil servants, advisors, volunteers, voters, and ordinary citizens who carried the weight alongside them. Success has a remarkable ability to erase invisible people from memory. Gratitude restores them. Perhaps that is why gratitude is more than good manners. It is accurate thinking. It reminds us that effort matters. But effort never stands alone. The Scottish philosopher Adam Smith observed that prosperity emerges from countless individuals contributing to something larger than themselves. Long before modern management theories, he understood that civilization functions through cooperation. The more successful we become, the easier it is to forget that cooperation. The wiser we become, the more clearly we see it. There is a simple question every successful person should ask themselves from time to time. If I had been born somewhere else, to different parents, in another century, would my life have unfolded exactly the same way? For most of us, the honest answer is no. That answer should not create guilt. It should create humility. Because humility keeps curiosity alive. Curiosity keeps learning alive. Learning keeps growth alive, and growth prevents success from becoming a prison. The greatest people in history were rarely those who believed they had reached the end of the journey. They remained explorers. They remained students. They remained willing to admit they were wrong. Perhaps the strongest person is not the one who reaches the top. Perhaps it is the one who reaches the top and still looks down with gratitude instead of pride. Because the moment success convinces you that you no longer need to grow, success quietly becomes the beginning of your decline.
Chapter 8: Becoming Dacian.
In the autumn of 1881, an elderly man walked quietly through the streets of his hometown in Scotland. Only a few decades earlier, he had worked as a poor boy in a textile factory. His family had struggled to survive. As a child, books had been a luxury. Knowledge had been something borrowed rather than owned. Now, after years of building one of the largest steel businesses in the world, he possessed more wealth than he could reasonably spend in 100 lifetimes. Most people expected him to build larger mansions, to buy more land, to accumulate even greater riches. Instead, he asked himself a different question. What is the purpose of having more than enough? The man was Andrew Carnegie. His answer would influence generations. Rather than measuring success by what he could keep, Carnegie began measuring success by what he could leave behind. He funded thousands of public libraries. He supported universities. He invested in museums, research, and education. His wealth stopped being merely personal. It became infrastructure for other people's dreams. Whether one agrees with every aspect of Carnegie's philosophy or not, he understood something profound. There comes a point where success changes its purpose. At first, we work to survive. Then we work to build stability. Then we work to create opportunity for ourselves. But eventually, another question appears. Who becomes stronger because I succeeded? That is the question that separates achievement from legacy. Achievement is about reaching the top. Legacy is about making the climb easier for those who come after you. History remembers both, but it remembers them differently. Many wealthy people have been forgotten. Many generous people have not. Think about a teacher. They may never become famous. Their name may never appear in newspapers. Yet over 40 years, they may shape the lives of thousands of students. One becomes a doctor. Another becomes an engineer. Another starts a company. Another discovers a life-saving medicine. The teacher may never receive public recognition, yet their influence continues long after they are gone. The same is true of parents, a father who teaches integrity, a mother who teaches resilience. Neither can measure the full value of those lessons. Character compounds across generations. One family's values become another family's inheritance. One person's discipline becomes another person's example. Success is rarely transferred through speeches. It is transferred through lives. This is why the African philosophy of Ubuntu carries such enduring wisdom. Ubuntu is often expressed through the simple idea, I am because we are. At first glance, the phrase appears simple, but it challenges one of the strongest myths in modern culture. The myth that human beings become great by separating themselves from everyone else. Ubuntu suggests the opposite. We become fully human through our relationships. Our language came from others, our education came from others, our culture came from others. Even our understanding of ourselves was shaped by countless interactions with people around us. If that is true, then success carries a responsibility, not because society demands it, because reality does. If thousands of people helped build your life, then your success naturally becomes part of someone else's future. This principle appears again and again throughout. This principle appears again and throughout history. One of its most powerful examples is found in the life of Nelson Mandela. After spending 27 years in prison, Mandela emerged into a nation standing at the edge of chaos. Many expected revenge. Many believed retaliation was inevitable. History had given him every reason to hate. Instead, he made a choice that surprised the world. He chose reconciliation. This did not mean forgetting the past. It did not mean pretending injustice had never happened. It meant refusing to let yesterday's suffering become tomorrow's prison. Mandela understood something that many leaders never learn. Power is not measured by how many people obey you. Power is measured by what becomes possible because you led. His greatest achievement was not simply becoming president. It was helping create the conditions for millions of South Africans to imagine a shared future instead of an endless cycle of revenge. That is the difference between influence and legacy. Influence changes the present. Legacy changes the future. The same principle appears in science. When a researcher publishes a discovery, they are doing more than solving one problem. They are handing the next generation a better starting point. Every scientific breakthrough becomes a stepping stone for another discovery. The scientist may never meet the people who build upon their work. That does not make the contribution smaller. It makes it timeless. The same is true in business. The finest entrepreneurs do more than create profitable companies. They create environments where other people grow. Employees develop new skills. Young professionals discover confidence. Future business owners learn leadership. Communities gain opportunity. A company is never only a source of income. At its best, it becomes a school where people discover what they are capable of becoming. The same is true inside a family. Parents often believe they are raising children. In reality, they are shaping future parents. The patience a child receives today may become the patience they show their own children 20 years from now. The honesty they witness may become the honesty that defines another generation. The courage they observe may echo through a family long after the original example has been forgotten. Human influence rarely ends with one lifetime, it multiplies. This is why the greatest investments are often invisible. Teaching, mentoring, encouraging, forgiving, listening, opening a door, believing in someone before they believe in themselves. None of these actions produce immediate headlines, yet they quietly alter the future. There is an old proverb often attributed to the ancient world. Society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. Whether those exact words originated in ancient Greece or appeared later in history, the wisdom they express has endured because it captures something universal. The people who build lasting civilizations rarely work only for themselves. They build for strangers they will never meet. The bridge builder knows future generations will cross first. The engineer designing a dam understands that children not yet born will depend upon it. The teacher preparing tomorrow's lesson knows the greatest results may appear decades after retirement. The parent sacrificing sleep for a newborn knows they are investing in a future they cannot fully imagine. This changes the meaning of ambition. Ambition is often portrayed as climbing higher than everyone else. Perhaps real ambition is something different. Perhaps it is leaving the world stronger than you found it. Imagine standing at the end of your life. Your career is over. Your achievements are complete. The applause has faded. The awards gather dust. The money has passed into someone else's hands. What remains? Not your job title, not the size of your house, not the number of people who knew your name. What remains is what continued because you lived. The person you encouraged who refused to give up. The family you protected. The values you passed forward. The opportunities you created. The lives that became larger because your life touched theirs. That is legacy. It cannot be bought. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be measured by a bank account. It is measured by human lives. Throughout this documentary, we have followed the invisible foundations beneath every success. The family you never chose. The country that shaped your opportunities. The mentors who redirected your path. The strangers who opened unexpected doors. The discipline that transformed opportunity into achievement. The humility that protected success from becoming arrogance. Now another foundation quietly appears. You. One day, someone else's story will include your name. Perhaps not in a history book. Perhaps not in a newspaper. But in a conversation. A child remembering a parent. A student remembering a teacher. An employee remembering a leader. A friend remembering the person who refused to let them surrender. The greatest privilege in life is not simply receiving help. It is becoming the person whose help changes another human being forever. Perhaps that is why success was never meant to end with us. Perhaps every opportunity we receive is also an invitation. An invitation to become part of the invisible foundation upon which someone else will build a life greater than our own. Chapter 9: When the Ocean is Broken. On the evening of December 5, 1955, the streets of Montgomery, Alabama became unusually quiet. Buses that were normally filled with passengers rolled through the city, almost empty. Thousands of ordinary people had made an extraordinary decision. They would rather walk for miles than continue accepting injustice. Among the leaders of that movement was a young pastor whose name was still unknown to much of the world. His name was Martin Luther King, Jr. He did not begin with political power. He did not command an army. He did not possess great wealth. What he possessed was something far more dangerous to oppression: hope. The hope that tomorrow did not have to look like yesterday. History is full of people who began with broken foundations. People born into poverty, into discrimination, into violence, into war, into families torn apart by addiction, abuse, or loss. If success depended entirely upon privilege, history would never have remembered their names. And yet, again and again, human beings have done something extraordinary. They have rebuilt foundations that life never gave them. This is one of the greatest mysteries of our species. Some people inherit stability. Others are forced to create it. Some inherit confidence. Others must build it one failure at a time. Some inherit opportunity. Others spend years searching for a single open door. The journey is not equal, but neither is it fixed. This is where many discussions about privilege become incomplete. Some people speak as though your beginning determines everything. Others speak as though your beginning determines nothing. Reality lives between those extremes. Your beginning matters, but it is not your ending. Consider the life of Abraham Lincoln. He was born into poverty. Formal education was limited. Books were scarce. Many evenings he studied by the light of a fireplace because candles were expensive. His childhood created obstacles. It did not destroy possibility. Years later, he would lead a nation through one of the greatest crises in its history. His success did not erase the hardship of his early life. It proved that hardship is not always the final chapter. The same pattern appears in the life of Oprah Winfrey. Her childhood was marked by poverty and trauma. Few looking at her early life would have predicted the influence she would one day possess. Yet she transformed suffering into empathy, pain into purpose. Her story reminds us that difficult beginnings can become powerful teachers, not because suffering is good. No one should romanticize suffering. Many people are crushed by circumstances they never chose. Poverty can close doors. Violence can leave lasting scars. Trauma can shape a lifetime. We should never pretend otherwise. But history also teaches another truth. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to adapt, to heal, to learn, to rebuild. Psychologists call this resilience. Resilience does not mean pain disappears. It does not mean fear vanishes. It means a person refuses to allow pain to become the final author of their life. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl witnessed this truth under the most horrific conditions imaginable. Inside Nazi concentration camps, he observed that while people could lose almost everything, they still retained one final freedom: the freedom to choose their response. Frankl never argued that suffering automatically creates greatness. He argued something much more profound. Meaning gives people the strength to continue when circumstances tell them to surrender. That idea appears throughout history. People endure extraordinary hardship when they believe there is something worth living for. A family, a dream, a purpose, a responsibility. Hope. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is disciplined belief. It is the decision to keep moving before there is evidence that tomorrow will be better. Another remarkable example comes from Nelson Mandela. 27 years in prison could have filled him with bitterness. It could have convinced him that humanity was beyond redemption. Instead, those years deepened his understanding of leadership. He emerged without surrendering his humanity. That transformation did not happen because prison was good. It happened because he refused to let prison define who he would become. This distinction matters. Circumstances influence us. They do not own us. There is another lesson hidden inside these stories. None of these people succeeded entirely alone. Lincoln found mentors in books. King stood alongside thousands of courageous citizens. Mandela depended upon allies inside and outside South Africa. Oprah found teachers, employers, audiences, and opportunities. Even those who rise from difficult beginnings eventually encounter helping hands. The myth of the self-made person disappears once again. Resilience does not replace relationships. It works alongside them. Perhaps this is one of the greatest acts of courage, not pretending you need no one, but remaining willing to accept help without surrendering responsibility. There comes a moment in every difficult life when two roads appear. The first says, my past will decide my future. The second says, my past will inform my future, but it will not imprison it. The first road leads to resignation. The second leads to possibility. Neither road is easy, but only one leads forward. If your foundation was weak, build a stronger one. If your childhood lacked encouragement, become the encouragement you once needed. If opportunity was scarce, prepare yourself so completely that when opportunity finally arrives, you are ready. You cannot rewrite your beginning. But every decision you make today becomes part of the foundation beneath tomorrow. That may be the greatest freedom any human being possesses. Not the freedom to choose where life began, but the freedom to influence where life goes next. One day, someone will look at your life and see only the success. They may never see the nights of uncertainty, the disappointments, the setbacks, the quiet determination that kept you moving when no one else believed. That is how history has always worked. The visible story hides the invisible struggle. Perhaps that is why we should never judge another person's journey too quickly, because we rarely know what they had to overcome simply to arrive where they stand today. The strongest foundations are not always the ones we inherit. Sometimes they are the ones we build with our own hands, and those foundations often become strong enough to support generations that follow.
Chapter Nation. You leave behind.
In the spring of 1883, an old man walked slowly through an orchard he had planted many years before. The trees towered above him. Their branches stretched toward the sky. Children played beneath their shade. Families gathered to enjoy fruit that would feed them through the seasons. A young visitor watched the old man in silence before finally asking, "Did you plant all of these trees?" The old man smiled. "Most of them." The visitor looked around in amazement. "But you knew you would never enjoy many of these yourself." The old man nodded. "My grandfather planted trees whose shade I enjoyed. My father planted trees whose fruit I ate. It is only right that I plant trees for people I will never meet." Whether this conversation happened exactly as it has been told through the years is less important than the truth it carries. Every civilization has survived because someone chose to build for the future instead of living only for the present. Every school exists because someone believed education should outlive them. Every bridge exists because someone imagined travelers they would never meet. Every hospital exists because someone cared about lives they would never know. Every library exists because someone believed knowledge should belong to future generations. The world we inherited is a gift from countless strangers. Some built roads, some wrote books, some discovered medicines, some defended freedom, some taught children, some simply raised honest families. Most of their names have disappeared, their contributions have not. Throughout this documentary, we have followed the invisible foundations beneath every human success. We discovered that no one chooses the family into which they are born. No one chooses the country that first shapes their opportunities. No one chooses the century that determines which technologies, industries, and ideas become possible. We learned that teachers, mentors, neighbors, and even strangers quietly redirect lives in ways history rarely records. We saw that opportunity alone is never enough. Without discipline, opportunity fades. Without humility, success becomes dangerous. Without gratitude, achievement loses perspective. Without purpose, even great success begins to feel empty. And now we arrive at the final lesson. Every generation inherits a foundation. Every generation becomes a foundation. There is no escaping this truth. Whether we realize it or not, someone is learning from us. A child is watching how we respond to disappointment. A colleague is observing how we treat people with less power than ourselves. A friend is learning whether integrity still matters. A son is discovering what it means to become a man. A daughter is discovering what respect looks like. Leadership does not begin when people start following you. Leadership begins the moment your actions begin teaching someone else. Most people spend their lives asking, how can I become successful? It is an understandable question. But eventually another question becomes more important. What will remain because I lived? Money changes hands. Buildings eventually crumble. Businesses are sold. Careers come to an end. Titles are forgotten. Even the greatest empires eventually become chapters in history books. Yet some things continue traveling through time. Character, wisdom, kindness, courage, knowledge, hope. These are the true inheritance of humanity. They move from one life to another, from one generation to the next, often without anyone noticing. The philosopher Viktor Frankl believed that meaning is found not only in what we receive from life, but also in what life asks of us. Perhaps that is the final question every successful person must answer. Not, what did I get from the world? But, what did the world receive because I was here? Imagine for a moment that your life is a bridge. Long after you are gone, people continue crossing it. Some will never know your name. They will not know the sacrifices you made. They will not know the fears you overcame. They will not know the failures that nearly stopped you. They will simply cross safely because you built something strong enough to carry them. That is legacy, not being remembered by everyone, but making someone else's journey possible. The remarkable thing about foundations is that they are rarely admired. Visitors praise the cathedral. Few think about the stones buried beneath it. People celebrate the tallest tree. Almost nobody remembers the roots. Yet without those unseen foundations, everything above them collapses. Perhaps the same is true of a meaningful life. The greatest lives are not always the most visible. They are the lives that quietly make other lives possible. The teacher who inspires curiosity. The parent who chooses patience. The mentor who gives someone a second chance. The entrepreneur who creates honest work. The neighbor who refuses to ignore another person's suffering. The friend who stays when everyone else walks away. History is built by people like these, not because they sought recognition, but because they understood something simple. Every act of integrity strengthens the world. Every act of generosity expands possibility. Every act of courage gives someone else permission to be courageous. That is how civilizations endure. Not through extraordinary people appearing once in a century, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices every single day. When this documentary began, we questioned one of the most popular ideas in modern culture, the idea of the self-made person. After everything we have explored, perhaps the answer has become clear. No one begins alone, no one succeeds alone, and no one leaves this world without becoming part of someone else's story. The question was never whether invisible foundations exist. They always have. The real question is this: when your journey is over, will the foundation beneath the next generation be stronger because you lived? Hundreds of years from now, no one will care how expensive your car was. No one will remember how many followers you had. No one will ask how many awards stood on your shelf. History has always cared about something deeper. Because you lived, did hope become stronger? Did knowledge travel further? Did opportunity reach more people? Did courage outlive fear? Did the world become just a little better than the one you inherited? If the answer is yes, then your life became something greater than success. It became a foundation. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a human life. Not how high we climbed, but how many people were able to climb because we chose to build.